said, I'm Brian Copeland. I also have one of our current students here, Keith Yost. Another one of our current students, Jeff Yates, unfortunately could not be here today. But these two people in particular, just to kind of give you a background story, I teach in one of my classes is methods of physical education as far as team activities. And 5 years ago when I started working at IUPUI, I started looking at the current course content and trying to figure out what could we do to drastically change what's going on now in physical education classes. And one of the things that has always been a big deal for me is this aspect of creativity and why in the United States it just has completely gone by the wayside. So, talking to a few students and trying to get together a couple of things there for that particular class, I decided to implement what was called a creative game sort of assignment. And we'll get a little bit more into the basics of that a little bit later in this presentation about how you can use that if you're a faculty member at a college institution. But this particular activity, I think, works very, very well, starting from an elementary school level and then progressively adding some levels on. The first part, as far as when we talk about it from an elementary level, notice that when you're looking at these different objects, there are things that in an elementary school class that we're used to using. First of all, a hoop, which Keith actually created this. So if you have any ideas about designs and things that you want to talk about at the end of this session, please do. But it's a basic hoop that you kind of put down with some floor tape or any other tape. Typically in this sport, what we do not have, obviously, is a chandelier. And we typically have a lot more space in the physical education class when we run it. So keep that in mind today as far as when we're participating in this activity. Some other things to kind of keep in mind is poly spots. And those of us who work in physical education, which is probably the majority of us, understand that it takes a very, very long time to take a particular boundary markers down if they're not already inside the gymnasium. So for what was planned to do, we decided that poly spots would be a great way to make the areas that Keith will talk about a little bit later. Some suggestions on the handout, because I didn't want this to be an activity that allowed us to sit here and talk for 30 minutes, just to kind of run down a few things. The rationale with creativity I've kind of already talked about before, and this aspect of problem solving. I've also found in a lot of the labs that I've worked in and classes that I've taught before. I taught 2 years in the Atlanta Public School System before I moved up here to Indiana. But some things to kind of keep in mind when I've enacted creative game assignments in classes, whether in elementary learners or middle school learners or high school learners, I found that they take more ownership in what's going on in the classroom. Okay, and that's a very important thing because the first thing that we're always evaluated on is classroom management. Our principals come in and the first thing they say a lot of times is this idea of busy, happy, and good. And a lot of times if you gave them a litmus test, they couldn't tell you where we fit on the curriculum as far as what we're doing. So from that aspect alone is something else to kind of keep in mind. Some suggestions I wrote here for elementary learners for 5th and 6th grades, and this is just based on some of the years that we've done here. First of all, I would not do this activity for any grade lower than 5th or 6th grade because you tend to find some of the skills and motor skills that they've learned at that point, they're starting to shape them in 5th or 6th grade. As you'll see here, and as we've kind of noted on the poster, a lead into this type of activity is a sport like speedball that we've done before, a sport like team handball, and of course that's a little bit different from just the handball that you're taking and knocking against the wall. And then another sport that we've done before in the past, I've had down here, is speedball, handball.
A lot of basketball things, ball.
Ultimate Frisbee is
Ultimate
something that's
Frisbee has
involved as well. Typically in a team activities class such as this, we start with Ultimate Frisbee because it teaches students about space and awareness and catching. The second thing that we moved to is we moved to team handball. Has been the second sport which, incidentally, if you go overseas, team handball is taught in a lot of context. And this is a good cardiovascular activity. And the third thing, as we've talked about before, is speedball, which a few of us are a little bit familiar with as well. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind with your lower groups. Also, simple concepts that students can hold on to, such as walking, such as pathways, such as basic catching the ball. As you'll notice, and this is I've got some students here, former current students kind of spread out here. As you notice, you look at the types of equipment that we have here. Thank you, sir. This is an indoor soccer ball, and I think this works very well for this type of activity because it's pretty fast paced, as you'll see in a few minutes. And the tendency is for a lot of times is that students don't focus on catching the ball with two hands. Well, with this particular ball, as you know, they don't catch it with two hands. If it glances off of their face, they're not going to get a big time sting off it as they would if you use like a regular team ball or even in some context of football. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind. This is another ball that we'll kind of use for younger learners that we'll have in our labs at IUPUI. This is a smaller soccer ball because obviously some students have smaller hands. And this is actually too inflated. I'd actually take a little bit of air out of this ball, which in this sport doesn't matter because you're not going to be drilling the ball anyway. So thank you for that.
A couple other things I can use is
Yeah.
you can use a volleyball or maybe one of those training volleyballs. I've used that before. That works really well. Anything that has a little bit of a bounce to it, but nothing that's going to be really playground balls are okay if that's the only thing you have to use. But I've noticed with playground balls, there's a lot of bounce to them, so there's a lot of different, ball goes a lot of different places. So you can use pretty much anything, but your best option will probably be the indoor soccer ball or a training volleyball. That's soft and if it gets hit, it won't get hurt.
Very good. As you're moving students up to the middle school level, one thing I always try to talk about is, and most of us notice, you want to pair students that have the same ability level. Because in a sport like this, as we kind of show in a little bit, it's a lot of running around. And one thing that you can also tie to that particular aspect is this concept of having students with a pedometer. So we get all of this grant money, and we try to figure out, well, where do we use a pedometer other than just walking, running, and jogging? Well, this is an opportunity to use it. I actually have, I think I gave 3 of my students a pedometer, and at the end of this particular session, we're going to see how many steps they got in this particular instance of this activity. The last thing I want to cover is what to do for those of us who are going to be in college classes or teaching college level students. Notice when you leave outside here today, there's a little bit of a poster that has a mock-up of kind of the activities that I've led them through this point so that they could learn how to create their own games for understanding, learn how to talk about sport education model as far as them creating the games a few months ahead and then playing it in that particular type of element. The tactical games approach is one that I use that many of us have probably heard before, which is actually getting students to think about what you're going to do in this particular situation so that somebody will be set up for a score. Now, with all of that being said, one thing that we did do today, which I'm kicking myself still for not doing it, is it wasn't where we had, first of all, a small space. The second thing was it wasn't where we didn't have this audio video equipment. But no matter, it's going to be all right, and we think we're going to work well. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Keith for a few minutes, and then we're going to start with some activity.
Okay. Class, me and my friend Jeff, we got together and we have a background in some basketball and different sports, and we had played these games that he had talked about, team handball, team frisbee, speedball. So we got together and we came up with this game. It's a very simple game, but it has a lot of different aspects to it. The first thing that you're going to notice is that the goal that we have for this game is not your typical kind of goal. It's only 4 feet tall. So it's usually shorter than most people playing this game, unless you get to the elementary level. You have some students that are smaller, but usually the goal's a little bit smaller than people that are playing the game. This is a big factor into the game because of trajectory of shots, different things that have to go with these spots on the floor. The next important thing I want to draw your attention to is this circle that goes around the goal. This is the biggest important part of this game. It is called the no-go zone. The way this is represented is the goal sits in the middle, and this circle guards the outside of this goal. At any point in time in this game, you cannot step inside this circle. The ball's inside, you can't go through. If you're running around the circle trying to get to a person on the other side, you cannot cut across. You have to go around the circle the entire game. The next important thing that you can't really see because of the space is there would be a bigger circle around the outside of the smaller circle. It's usually about, I'd say about 18 let's see, it's about 6 feet from there, so it'd probably be close to 15 feet away from the basket. This is going to represent your 3-point line. Okay, so there's a bigger circle that goes around the outside of this goal. So in essence, if you can imagine, you have a big basketball court with a square. Inside that basketball court, there's a big circle, and then on the inside, there's a smaller circle, and in the middle is where your goal goes. So if you think of it in a basketball court, you have that mid-court, you have the circle that goes around. You can use that as a no-go zone area. And then around the outside, there would be the 3-point line, and then you would use the boundaries of your basketball court as your outside boundaries of the game. Okay, so we have our no-go zone, we have our 3-point line. A couple other lines that would be part of the game. There is a free throw line that is directly behind the basket. And then there's also, if you think about the volleyball lines on a basketball court in most gyms that have volleyball lines in there, there's lines that run parallel to each other going this way and one on that side as well. So there would be a person who would be shooting a free throw would be standing there while the rest of the teams would line up on either line. So those are kind of some dimensions of the game. Some basic aspects of the game, if you're shooting, you have to shoot outside of the no-go zone. So if you shoot from outside the no-go zone inside the 3-point line, that's worth 2 points. If you shoot outside the 3-point line, it's worth 3 points. The next thing that you want to pay attention to is when you have the ball, you cannot move. You either can pass or you can shoot. It is the pivot point. You can pivot a foot in order to move around, but you cannot move with the ball. That is the only time in this game that you should not be moving. The rest of the time, you have to be moving around to get open and to find someone to pass the ball to or shoot. Once you have the ball, either you can pass or shoot. Also, if the ball touches the ground at any point in time, that is a change of possession. So that means you can't dribble, you can't bounce pass. It always has to be a chest pass, back and forth, because if the ball touched the ground, then that would be a change of possession to the other team. And the game does not stop. That's the nice thing about this game. It is a non-stop game. The only time this game stops is if a shot is made and that team takes the ball out of bounds. But if the ball touches the ground, all they do is the other team picks the ball up. They have to clear the ball outside the 3-point line, and then the game continues as it is. Anything else?
No, I would just make sure to kind of keep in mind the reason why we do the lead up ultimate frisbee, because students understand with the ultimate frisbee, if they don't catch the frisbee, what happens? Stops, and it has to switch over to the other team. So that's the reason why you do a few lead up activities to help them understand that, so that transition into a sport like this, you don't have a lot of downtime, so to speak.
Okay. Passing. So you take 3 students, and you can do this with, you can set up multiple polyspots if you have more than 3 students in your class. So each student stands on a polyspot. Okay. The way this works is you're going to teach the students that they're going to be working on chest passing. Also, once they pass the ball, they have to move to the open polyspot. Okay? So you're going to pass the ball to him. Once you pass in the ball, make sure you give a nice chest pass. Step through, pass the ball. Now that you've moved, you're going to go to the open spot. Now you would pass to him, you would come to this spot. This way, the students see that once they pass the ball, they have to move to get open. It really gives them that, because you have different spots available, then they're seeing, okay, once I pass, they're getting their mind ready, okay, once I pass, now I have to move to get open. Pass to whoever, move to the open spot. And you can make this as quick as you want. So once they get the hang of it, it gets faster and faster. Once you see in the game, okay, moving quick passes is necessary for success.
And on that aside, when we had first started getting together some different lead-in activities for this game, we started using the 3-person weave. Well, the problem with a 3-person weave, depending on developmental level students, is that you have a lot of students dropping the ball, which is what you don't want to have happen necessarily in this game.
Right. And also, if you are teaching in a classroom, you come in and you say, does anybody know how to do the 3-person weave? Not a lot of people understand what the 3-person weave is. If they have some kind of basketball background, they might have an idea, but it's such a complex drill, and in order not to let the ball touch the ground, it's not very effective. So this is why I use this activity instead of the 3-person weave.
All right. You ready to play?
Sure.